Hey guys, all right, just before the show starts, I wanted to let you guys know that my fight against cancel culture is still happening. Please go to the description below. There's a link titled Support My Fight Against Cancel Culture. If you want to help my fight, please consider giving a bit of a donation. All the information is in that link. With that being said, enjoy the show. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Let's Talk. We are here. I'm here with Dr. Dione Harley, and we started a conversation a few weeks ago about the tyrannical. Sorry, I forget the title because that's what was it again?
The tyrannical tendencies of the trans movement.
Yeah, I don't want to misspeak on that one. Yeah, it was a very interesting conversation. DNA in a moment is going to give a very brief rundown of what was discussed, and then we're going to address some of the questions that you guys had last time that we maybe or couldn't get to in the last one. But remember also that if you're tuning in now, feel free to ask any of the questions that you may have. Maybe you watched recently the video, and because when I put out that tweet this morning, I noticed that a few people went to go watch it. So if you have any questions after watching that video, please feel free to jot it down in the live chats. We will get to it tonight as well. So, Dr. DNA, very briefly, or as brief as needs be, what was discussed? A synopsis of the last episode.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and continue this very provocative conversation. So, last time we were talking about, I was specifically focusing on a paper that a philosopher wrote, and it's called In Defense of Transracialism. And central claim of the paper is that if you accept the logic that commits you to transgenderism, in virtue of that, you're also committed to transracialism because it's the exact same logic. And the reason I decided to go through the details of the paper is because this was a paper that got a lot of attention in North America when it was put in a journal, because the transgender movement was very upset about it because they didn't like the conclusion that she came to. So what they did was is they, and it's, I'm not, this is not even just people on the outside busy living their lives. These are people within the academy, within um, intellectual arenas, got a petition together where they accused the author of not citing, she essentially was accused of poor scholarship, so she wasn't citing proper sources, proper being a relative term in this context. And so they wanted, what would normally happen is that someone would write a rebuttal to the paper and submit it to the same journal. But in this case, they decided that they would create a petition and hopefully get the paper, force the editors of the journal to retract the paper, which had never been done. So for the philosophical community, this caused an enormous uproar because all of us were incredibly upset because at the time I was doing my PhD in philosophy. So even a member of my department signed that petition, which was quite embarrassing to me. Um, and I mean, it was my ex's supervisor. He was also doing a PhD in philosophy. And we had a discussion about it where he was so upset about it that I asked him, are you still okay to have her as your supervisor? Because he was so upset about her, the way she thought about these things and what she did, that he wasn't convinced he could actually have her as his supervisor anymore. Anyway, he did just, bury the hatchet and carry on. But so I decided to look at the paper, and then last time we spoke, I went through the argument she puts forward to show people that what she says is not unreasonable. It is exactly what an analytic philosopher would do. It's completely meets the standards of analytic philosophy, and if it went through a peer review process, what that means is that people who are experts in the given area will assess the paper, and they will decide whether the paper is of a good enough standard to be put into the journal. And she met those requirements because that's what happened. So last time I went through that, and the essential points I raised at the end of it, I'm going to briefly give you a rundown of the argument,
Okay.
but I want to clarify what our conclusion was. So my main focus last time was to say that the tyrannical aspects of the trans movement, and here again, I drew the distinction between trans people and the trans movement, because often trans people are not the ones who are causing this kind of disruption. It's often the people who claim to represent their causes, and often are not even trans themselves. But even if they are, they take themselves to be spokespeople of all trans people, which is obviously ridiculous. So I'm talking about the trans movement, not trans people. And the harm that I see them causing in terms of how they're pushing their narrative is that they are trying to get important research thrown out. So this paper that I'm going to go through again is an example of that. But then also in England, they caused an uproar, and research regarding trans people transitioning back to their original gender was undermined because funding was removed from this professor who wanted to study uh, trans people who then transitioned back to their original gender, and he initially was given the funding, but then after that the funding was withdrawn because the university didn't want to draw attention to itself. Now, as I mentioned last time, this is a disservice to everyone, including trans people, because this through knowledge we understand these things better, and if we're going to bring children into it, which is what is happening, we children are being diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and there is a lot of controversy around how we're supposed to approach children like that, how we're supposed to handle their gender dysphoria. um, and we'll can talk about that again. So there are two approaches. There's the wait for watch approach and the affirmation approach. In the first case, the idea is just that you just leave the child be and see whether their feelings of gender dysphoria eventually dissipate. Or you have conversations with them around it to understand whether it might not be something else that's going on. So maybe they're feeling ostracized at school, they're suffering from anxiety or depression, but it's not because they actually do really believe that they are a different gender to the one they're assigned at birth. Um, the other approach is affirmation, the affirmation approach, where you're not supposed to do that. So you're not supposed to really question them. You're supposed to help them feel supported in their decision or in their claim that they are not the gender that they were assigned at birth. And essentially, you support whatever. So if they take blockers, puberty blockers, then you need to support that. If they want to claim they want to eventually go through medical procedures, then you need to support that. And the reason that I think that that's premature to make a call on exactly how to handle that kind of situation is because we don't know enough about it yet. So to essentially just go along with what kids think they want, it doesn't make any sense to me because as adults we often don't know what we want. So, anyway, so at the end of last time, I just got us back to the conclusion that we can't have the trans movement block research from happening because they may not like the conclusions we come to, because it's a disservice to them and to children and to people who are affected by the trans movement demanding things like like that trans people can go into the bathrooms according to their gender, they go into prisons according to their chosen gender, they participate in sports according to their chosen gender. It has an enormous impact on other individuals. So, just a quick run. So, I did actually manage to to reduce the argument to its bare bones. So, it won't be like it was last time, where it took us quite a long time to actually work through everything. Um, so, I'll quickly run through that. Please, Joe, if what I'm saying is confusing, please stop me
Okay.
and ask to explain it in a different way, because I don't want people to get lost in the technicalities and not be able to actually enjoy the conversation along with us.
Yes, and also before you start, let me also tell people, because we had a few people tune in now. We are doing a recap on the previous episode, but mainly to address the questions or comments that we may have missed out on. If you recently watched the part one and have questions, feel free to drop them in the live chats right now, or as we're going through it now. And thank you, Herman Ruas, for becoming a member to my channel, as well as donating a 35 Rand super chat. Thank you so much. Sorry, DNA, but apparently in YouTube you have to address these things. It's a rule. Otherwise, yeah, I lose people. Anyway. So, thank you, Yanni, for tuning in. Good to see you here again. And Hert Janse van Rensburg. Awesome name. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Everybody else that is tuned in, remember, feel free to ask us anything. Nothing's off the table. DNA and I are we have both curious minds, and we're happy to answer any questions you guys may have to the best of our ability. So, DNA, take it away.
Okay. So she starts the paper by saying that this is her general assumption, that we think that if we treat people in a certain way where we don't allow them to assume the identity that they've chosen, we generally consider this to be some kind of harm. So in the case of this paper, she's considering if you support or believe in someone being trans, doesn't that open the door then to you thinking that someone could be transracial? And the case that's used as the example is Rachel Dolezal, who's a white woman by birth, but she told people she was black when she was grown, and everyone believed this, and she for the longest time lived as a black woman until it came out. I think her brother, her stepbrother, they were adopted. I can't remember the circumstances, but he then leaked that she actually isn't. She's white, but she could have passed for black because her skin was darker, so she could have been a light-skinned black woman. So this caused a lot of outrage in the trans community as well. So again, the trans movement community, they say that's crap. You can't be transracial, and it's offensive to trans people. So Rebecca Tuvel is the philosopher who now wrote this paper, and she then starts the paper by saying there are two conditions, it seems, to successfully transitioning in terms of your identity. So whatever your identity transition looks like, there are two factors. One is that you need to self-identify as that thing. So you as a person need to, in some way, feel that that is your identity. And then also a community, the relevant community that you now want to belong to, has to also accept you into that community and also recognize that you are in some sense part of that community. So she says that obviously we've seen that trans people have, even if they've managed to do the first thing, they've struggled for a long time in terms of the second thing, because in communities in general, people have struggled to accept them, and so they've been marginalized and they've been discriminated against as a result. She then goes into why would one think that you can be transgender but you can't be transracial? And one way of making the argument is to say, well, sex and race just aren't the same kinds of things. So just because you can transition in the one case doesn't mean you can just transition in the other case, because sex and race are just different kinds of things. But now, of course, you need to defend that. So what is it about sex and race that makes them different kinds of things? So one thing you might want to say is, well, sex is biological. And as we know, race is not biological. It's not biologically grounded. It's actually grounded by a lot of other things that have nothing to do with biology. And in fact, there's greater genetic differences often in racial groups than there is outside of them. So that's maybe one way you can say that sex and race are different. But of course, the transgender movement is not going to want to commit themselves to that, because they don't want to say that transgenderism is a biological aspect of your being. Precisely because they want to say that there are two things at play. There's your biological sex, and then there's your gender.
Yes.
Because they hold that the gender is a social construct, that's how they can say that even though I'm born male, as in I have male genitalia, I don't feel or identify as male, because I feel that my gender is female, and so there's a disconnect. And then also, you don't want to commit yourself, transgender people wouldn't want to commit themselves to the biological view, because they also want to say, well, it's not like in a lot of trans people, it's not like they were born knowing what their gender was. They eventually figured out that there's this, they felt that there was something wrong, or they couldn't pinpoint what it was. And then eventually they realized, oh, actually, it's because even though I'm born a male, I don't feel like I'm male. I feel like I'm female. So it would exclude those kinds of people. So you're not going to want to commit yourself to that. But the part of the paper that I find interesting, and it's what you and I spent a lot of time on last time,
Yes.
is that she then goes on to say that, and this is, I'm just going to take it straight from the paper, even if there is a biological basis to sex, it doesn't automatically follow that there is something it feels like to be biologically female that grounds a shared experience of what it's like to be a woman. Okay. So, okay, first you and I were talking about what's weird that she calls into question whether sex is biological because it is. And there's no reason for a transgender person to not accept that, precisely because they're drawing that distinction between sex and gender. So it's odd to me that she needs to even bring that into question. But anyway, let's just push that to one side. She then says, well, there's nothing it's like to be a woman. There's no shared experience. In which case, and of course, what she means is when she's saying that, or I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt and say that this is what she means. That when feminists were fighting for their rights, part of what they were fighting against was the stereotypical notion of a woman and what it means to be a woman. And because that's what it means to be a woman, you can only perform certain roles in society. So you have to be a housewife and you have to raise the children and all these sorts of things. But their point was that's not all that there is to being feminine. I mean, you can be a woman and you can still be a great businesswoman and you can be a great leader. Like there were lots of, but that's fine and all, and I agree with that. But what I question, or in this case, I think is actually doing damage to their argument, is the claim that there's nothing it's like to be a woman. There's no distinctive experience that you're pointing to.
Yeah.
Because without that something, what on what grounds are you claiming that you self-identify as a woman if you were born a man? So if you don't, in some sense, understand that the feelings you're having, the disconnect you're feeling, is because you feel some kind of experience of being a woman, then in what sense are you part of a class where you now say I fall under that category of gender?
Yeah.
Because gender, whatever you want to say, even if it's not biologically based, it's still a category. So what? So category is something that's distinguished in virtue of specific features that make it the thing that it is, make it not be any other thing. And so if we're talking about gender, surely a big part of that is not just how you're treated. So it's not just that I now am treated as a woman because I look like a woman and I dress like a woman and I act like a woman. It's because I feel a certain way on the inside, because otherwise I could just as easily say I'm a man. But I would never say that because I feel that I am a woman. So this is where you and I we stopped there for quite some time, because in my opinion it's not actually focused on in her paper, but it's one of the most important points that I don't understand about the transgender argument. If you so that was for me a good point to actually emphasize again. Um, and so that was the one. I don't think we could find anything that we could resolve there. So, but anyway,
Maybe we will tonight.
maybe something.
All right. So while you're getting ready there, Gert saying good evening, and Eleutheria is here, and Hendo sending winking faces. Thank you, Hendo. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Remember, if you have any questions, don't be shy to drop them in the live chats. DNA, continue.
Okay, so we were saying that so the argument from the trans movement is sex and race are different. We thought about maybe sex and race are different in terms of the one is biologically grounded, the other one isn't. well, we can't make that argument because it commits the trans movement to conclusions they're not willing to accept, which is that being trans is not a biological issue. It's a gender issue, and it's how you self-identify. It's not because your biology shows that about you. In fact, your biology could show the complete opposite, but you could still feel like you are another gender. So then she thinks about, okay, well, maybe sex and race are different because you can change your sex, but you can't change your race. So maybe that's what they mean. In the case of sex, it's fine to say you're transgender because you can change your sex. But when it comes to race, you can't just change your race. Okay. So yes, you can change your sex. I mean, that would be a painful and lengthy procedure to physically alter your body in that way. But yes, you can. But the idea is then you'd have to be committed to the idea again that if you can't change your race, then it must be something like your race is biologically grounded. It's something that, so she talks about the ancestry. You can't alter your ancestry.
Yeah.
Come from is where you come from. You can't just revise that.
Yeah.
But we know that race is not a biologically grounded thing. So we wonder, well, what is race? And race is actually a whole host of things. So ancestry could be one of them, but there are other components. And so obviously a lot of thinking has gone into, well, what constitutes a race? And the one definition that she uses in the paper is where someone basically invokes this idea of a family of traits. And you don't need to have all of them, but you need to have at least some of them. And so I think it's a man who comes up with this. But anyway, so the elements are self-awareness of ancestry, so you know where you come from. Public awareness of ancestry, someone else can trace your ancestry back. Culture, so the culture that you are a part of and that you exhibit. Experience and self-identification, so experiences you've had and how you self-identify. And clearly when it comes to Dollar Sol's case, so she's a reference point. But remember, in the paper, she doesn't have a horse in the race in that case. She's not saying, look, she's not taking a position either way where the Dollar Sol is or isn't transracial. She's just using her as a way of making the points that she's trying to make. And so she says, well, look at Dollar Sol. Okay, so maybe she doesn't have the ancestry. But it seems like she's got a whole host of other things in place. She's got the self-identification. She's got the experiences, because for the longest time, she lived as a black woman. She told people she was black. She lived in a black culture. So if her brother hadn't said anything, I mean, maybe no one would have known about this for the next 50 years that she was actually white. So she has the culture thing down. And so it seems like she's got most of the elements in place to be able to legitimately say that she is part of the black race. So in that case, now we can't say that sex and race are so different. So the final part of the paper is then to say, okay, well then why is it that you can't change races? And this is where we got to the more juicy objections, which I'll go quickly because they weren't particularly conceptually they're not that tricky. So the one objection was, well, she can't change her race because you need to grow up with the experience of being discriminated against, because that's an essential part of being black, is that you felt what it was like to be discriminated against. And Tuville says, well, look, sure, she hasn't grown up with it, because when she grew up, she was growing up as a white woman. But when she embraced being black, at that point, so in the present moment or in the recent past, she was experiencing it, because even though she passed for a light-skinned black woman, she told people she was black, and she herself says that she experienced discrimination as a result. So it's an arbitrary thing to say, oh, okay, well, you haven't experienced enough discrimination, or you haven't experienced the kind of discrimination we say, because it would be the same argument you could make against light-skinned black women who are not treated the same, or definitely in the past they weren't treated the same, as very dark-skinned black women. And how in India, the same thing. If you're light-skinned, it's considered fairer, it's considered more beautiful, and so you're not treated the same way as dark-skinned women. So does that mean that they're not black because they weren't discriminated against in the same way? So it seems sort of arbitrary. Then the second objection is well, people, so the group she wants to belong to, they have said that her ancestry matters. So it's not up to her, it's up to the group. But again, this then makes the transgender argument weaker as well, because it's again now up to a group or the status quo to determine whether you're allowed in. And if that was the case, then for the longest time, the transgender community weren't allowed into the group because people said
Yeah.
that they get to be part of the group. And so the whole idea is you can't invoke the status quo as any sort of like legitimate line you can't cross, because why? That's the whole point of progress, is that there are these seemingly, moral or significant lines that we realize later actually they're arbitrary. They actually have nothing to do with anything. It's just because it's how it's always been. So that's not a great argument. And then she says, well, oh, the other objection is it's harmful to the black community to self-identify as black because it's essentially akin to blackface. So blackface, remember, is where you paint yourself black. I mean, Justin Trudeau should know a lot about this. And you essentially you adopt these sort of caricatured, stereotypical, exaggerated features that don't really show what it's like to be in that culture. It sort of it mocks it in a way. It reduces it to something that makes it seem very empty. And the response to that is, well, sure. I mean, there might be cases where people would do that, but in the same way, there could be transgender people who are not genuinely transgender, but are also just dressing up as women because, that's something that they get a kick out of or whatever. But that doesn't negate the fact that there could be people who genuinely commit to this, as in, like De La Salle does. She didn't tell anyone that she was actually white. She told everyone she was black, and she lived that way for years and years and years. So it wasn't just a superficial kind of, passion of the moment and then it was over. She really adopted this as a way of being. So again, that doesn't seem to be what we're talking about here. And then the final one was that, well, you can't change your race because it's, especially in Della Sol's case, because it's a white woman going into a black race, because that's literally the epitome of white privilege, because she at any time can go back to being white if she so chose and have all the privileges that go along with that. And again, but you can say the same thing about the transgender movement. You transition back to your original. So if you're a man and you give up the privilege by transitioning to being a woman, you can at any time transition back and have some of those. So why does that destroy the idea of this category being a thing? That you can move out of the category doesn't stop the category from being a thing. And then also says, well, look, isn't it the ultimate giving up of white privilege? That she's moving from a privileged race to a race that has been underprivileged. So yes, and then she also at the end she talks about what prevents us from identifying as anything we like. So if you want to identify as a hippopotamus or an elf, or they call them otherkin, what stops you from that slippery slope? Because she is at least trying to say, look, even if you can be transracial, she doesn't support the view that you can essentially transition and self-identify as anything. But what has to stop you, the stopping point is this: you can't identify something if you have no idea what it would be like to be that thing. So because there are no elves, we would never know what it would be like to be an elf. So it's not something you can identify as. But then I have the same objection to transgenderism, because if you're a man and you've lived as a man, you have no idea what it's like to be a woman, because you've never experienced what it's like to be a woman, because you've never been treated as a woman. So in that sense, I'm also not clear on how it is that you can essentially, even if you feel some sort of discomfort with yourself, how do you ever come to the realization that what you're experiencing is the feeling of being a woman when you're actually in a man's body? So that's a question I have. And again, it's not because I'm saying transgender people don't exist. I'm saying that I don't understand it, and that I think that there are aspects of their position that leave them open to this sort of thing, where we have to then acknowledge that there are people who are transracial. And what seems odd to me is that they're trying to suppress research to ask these questions that in a lot of respects would seem to be progressive to me, because it's saying if you can't just draw these arbitrary lines. But it's weird to me that they're trying to stop these lines from, they're trying to keep these lines in place when they themselves have benefited from an arbitrary line being withdrawn. Um, so that's the argument in a nutshell. And then the thing you and I spoke about was the dangers that children are being exposed to. And the stats I mentioned was that um, if you adopt the wait for watch approach, so if you don't intervene with puberty blockers or medically intervene at all, children who suffer from gender dysphoria, about 60 to 90% of them will that will dissipate. The gender dysphoria will just go away by the time they're adults. Okay? But with the children that you did put on puberty blockers, so if you did intervene medically, all of them eventually transitioned completely. So I
Yeah.
think that that's very revealing in terms of the impact that intervention has, and that it's premature because we don't understand enough about. And I was talking to you about how it is that they even assess uh, children suffering from gender dysphoria to be able to even say that they qualify to be put on puberty blockers and things like that. And a lot of it is incredibly superficial. I mean, it's things like they it doesn't seem to me that they are actually exposed to a rigorous clinical process where they are assessed psychologically to determine whether what they're experiencing is something else and can be resolved in another way. It's often they ask them questions. It's literally like, one of those sort of superficial, sort of tick these boxes. Do
Mm.
you, if you're a boy, do you like playing with dolls or do you like playing with trucks? It's essentially a lot of things that I thought the feminists would say are incredibly stereotypical notions of what it means to be a woman and means to be a man. You can have a guy who is a guy. I mean, they don't question their gender, but they enjoy playing with dolls. The fact that you enjoy playing with dolls doesn't mean you're not a man. Here we go. I mean, you guys have dolls. They look a little different, but they're dolls. I mean, come on.
This is not a doll. This is a collector's item.
Oh, keep it night, buddy. Whatever.
Sorry, I couldn't resist that one. Uh, Germ Warfare joining us right now. Hello, Germ. Thank you for joining
Oh,
us. Saying hello, all. I'm surprised you. Well, I would say you would have a lot to say about this one, Germ. So please stick around if you have any questions. Cool. You were saying, sorry.
yeah. So in any case, so I just think that again, those are. It's odd to me that those are used as the standards for assessment when they're just acknowledging that being a woman is a lot more complicated and is a lot more varied than whether you play with dolls. Yet those are often the things you'll find on tests because often you're assessing kids or you're assessing like it's clear what you need to use to be able to assess whether. And also, like we were talking about, you could get it wrong. I mean, I told the story about my friend who's a grown woman,
Yes.
and she at one point was worried about she wasn't sure whether she was gay or not.
Mm.
So it's a question of you could still get it wrong, and so and then even more so when you're a teenager and you're just pretty much confused about everything. Um, for a teenager to make a claim like that and to take it seriously in the sense that the transgender movement is wanting us to by approaching this using this affirmation approach. I mean, you are literally just confirming that what they want. I mean, what any teenager wants is a sense of belonging, and
Yes.
with the rise of social media and all of the things that make us feel more cut off from, it's ironic, but it does. It makes us feel more cut off from each other, especially for teenagers who it's all about image. I mean, it's literally amplified. I mean, like, I think that's a big reason. For me, 13 Reasons Why is literally a worse version of The Breakfast Club. The Breakfast Club did it right, but the whole point of 13 Reasons Why is to show how technology has literally amplified that like a million times, where teenagers are being forced to face certain realities where they just never had to deal with before, and it's making them feel even more ostracized and even more lonely. And what these movements are offering them, so the trans movements, what it's offering them is a sense of belonging. It's a sense of being part of something, to explain why they're feeling this angst.
Mm.
And I would like to just use this opportunity to I actually had this conversation with my ex-boyfriend, and I said to him, look, here's the thing. I am by almost any stretch of the imagination, I'm literally fit into every category. I don't have any problems in terms of not fitting in by the looks of me, because I'm white, I'm a woman, I'm straight, I am intelligent enough to pursue what I want to pursue. Um, but does that mean that I automatically feel like I fit in? It
Mm.
really doesn't. As a teenager, I also had to, and not even just as a teenager, as an adult, I've also had to face those feeling of there's something wrong with me. Does that
Yeah.
mean that I think that means that I jump to the conclusion that I'm trans, or I'm something to explain what I'm feeling?
Mm.
I often wonder whether people who, like, again, not all, I'm not saying all transgender people are doing this, but I'm saying there's a risk, and especially with children there's a risk. If you can't figure out what it is that you're feeling, you're looking for any sort of remedy that can assist with that.
Mm.
And I just think that the way the transgender movement is currently approaching these issues, it's doing more harm than good. And so that's what I mean about the tyrannical tendencies of the trans.
Well said. All right, so let's get to some of the comments. Like I said, ladies and gentlemen, I am here with Dr. DNA Harley. We are doing a follow up on our previous topic, as Dr. Harley just said, the tyranny of the transgender movement. And let's see here. Germ Morfair says that he plays with dolls. He bought them at Adult World, and he's
Mhm.
definitely a man.
Okay. I think, only a man secure enough in his masculinity can admit that he plays with dolls.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. I mean, okay, sometimes I might take one of these bad boys out. Sometimes, if I'm
Okay.
bored. But most
Uh-huh.
of the time, they just hang there. They're just there existing because I think they look cool. Like,
But
that's it.
they also have dolls they just display in their rooms because they're pretty. Right?
All right, so I do want to get to some of the comments that were in the last episode. I snapshot them earlier today, and let's see here. So in the last episode, we had let's see if I can find it here. Where is it? Okay, so Eleutheria in the last episode had a comment. Teenage girls get given testosterone when what happens is they feel better, and that is a lot to do with the positive side effect of testosterone. She was just
Oh,
commenting.
okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So I think Eleutheria is in the comments if she remembers mentioning that. If she can elaborate a little bit on that now, that would be great. Why would I couldn't figure out why that comment was made at that point, so I would like to know like what that was related to. But I thought that was an
Yeah.
interesting comment.
Mhm.
Then we had Storm Legacy asking a question. In the case of Charlize, how much does parenting influence the decision by someone on their biology? Would the brain override parental influence?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you a story of a recent incident in Canada where, just to this point of how you're socialized. So you're getting two influences. You're getting influences from home and from school most of the time.
Yes.
So there's a little girl in Canada, and she went to school, and now they're using this way of teaching them about sexuality. That's the sort of the on the spectrum way of looking at sexuality. So you're not a man or a woman, you're on a spectrum.
Mm.
But they have this whole thing about, you can be a boy and actually be a girl. So there's no, so you, but what she took away from this is that what she feels about herself is something she can't trust. So she can't know she's a girl because she could be wrong about that.
Mm.
She was absolutely in tears because something that for most people is such a basic knowledge, such a basic foundation upon which to build their identity and their self esteem and who they are, they were taking away from these little kids. And this one girl who was, I think, intelligent enough and sensitive enough to understand the implications of in her being, even though she couldn't consciously get it, was saying to her parents, so how do I know I'm a girl? Like, I think I'm a girl, but what if I'm not a girl? Like,
Yeah,
how
I
do I?
think I saw that video.
And it upset her so much that the school actually, the parents actually then sued the school and said to them, you cannot teach a child something like this because, again, it's not fact. It's an ideology. And if you want to teach your, I mean, I would honestly, I would just take my kid out of the school. I
Yeah.
wouldn't, because I mean, you have to. I think these days parents have to probe very carefully where they send their kids to school and what kinds of values they want their kids to learn. And the problem isn't about whether she believes this. Honestly, if my kid later on, they can believe whatever they want, but at the developmental stage, if you're undermining their sense of self, something as basic as that, where they can't trust that they're a girl, you can. It doesn't mean you have to be narrow-minded about it. You can say to your girl, if you want to play with trucks, that's fine. Like it's not a problem.
Mm.
But I just recently heard about Charlize Theron's case that she said that she's raising her kid gender dysphoric.
I'm not sure. I do know that I think there's this thing which I wanted to touch on anyway in this episode. I don't know if it's in line with what's happening with the transracial thing or the transgender thing, but there's this new thing with parents that are saying, I don't want my child, I don't want to tell my child that it's a boy or a girl. It must
Mm.
decide for itself. And I think that's what Charlize is also doing.
Yeah. Again, just to remind people, you know that 99.98% of society of the population is either male or female. You're literally disrupting an entire system, complete entire way of thinking in terms of biological fact.
But you see, now this is what the transgenders are fighting. They're
Hmm?
saying that it's all about feelings, remember, and then it's not about biology.
Mm.
You see,
Yeah.
so if it's not about biology, and this is what I want to really get into now. Okay, so if it's not about biology and it's about feeling, as you said, that's very contradicting, especially when you start talking about transracial. Now, let's take it back a moment and dissect the whole idea of a feeling. To feel male, to feel female.
Mm.
What exactly, in your opinion, does that mean? Forget
Uh,
about the psychological mumbo jumbo about, oh, well, you like a truck, so now you're a boy. What, in a philosophical way, does it mean to be a male or a female?
oh, dude, yeah. I mean, look, I can't answer that on the spot. Any topic that you ask me to philosophically dissect would take me a very long time
Mm.
because not, and this is not my area of expertise. But I can only speak as a woman. I can only speak from that perspective and say what do I think informs my idea of being a woman and feeling like a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it has to do with the experiences that you accumulate over time. And a big part of it, yes, it is how people treat you, the people treating you as as some. I would say, like I've said in an interview before, I know I have masculine qualities. What I mean by that is I know I have qualities that are characteristically male, but I don't. That doesn't make me question whether I'm a woman.
Mm.
And the only thing I can say to explain that is to say that I think that men and women have both male and female traits, but big part of what informs your self identity is how you're treated. So I'm treated as a woman because I look like a woman, and in certain respects I act like a woman. But those experiences inform me shaping my own identity over time. And that's all of those experiences contribute to me starting to have this inner sense of being a woman.
Mm.
essentially it would be things like a man interacts with me in a certain way because he wants to date me or because he wants to sleep with me. And it's a very different way of interacting to how I would interact with a man if I wanted the same thing.
Yes.
I wouldn't handle it in the same way.
Yes.
All of those things adds to my me feeling like I am a woman. And that again, that doesn't mean that I can't recognize my male traits because I know I have them.
Mm.
But it's very complex and a very personal thing. But again, what I want to emphasize is I do think there's something it's like to be a woman. It's a feeling of it's essentially how I conceptualize of my identity based on all the experiences I've had of being treated as a woman, of acting like a woman. So you're constantly reinforcing it. So it's a constant feedback loop where you're sort of getting an input and you're acting it out. And it's feeding back into it. So I'm going to just answer it in Aristotelian terms because that's my area of expertise. But it's a disposition you develop over time. So it's a complex set of beliefs, values, emotions, reactions. It's an enormously complex thing that develops in you over time. And if we're looking at kids or teenagers, I mean, they haven't had the time to
Mm.
properly develop their dispositions. I mean, they're still very malleable, which is precisely why we say that we don't allow children to do a lot of things because we're saying that they're not in a position to make any rational choices for themselves. They're not autonomous agents yet because they're so malleable. I mean, even Meghan Markle and Prince Harry said that they were not going to raise their kid in a gendered way. What does that mean? You're not going to raise your kid in a gendered way. You gave the kid a male name. Of course,
Exactly.
it's a male name.
Oh man, I think you gave a very good answer. Regardless, and the thing is, like, I wanted to ask you that question because I think, like you said, now there is, I think, a misinterpretation or a. It seems like there's this transgender movement, or some people in the transgender movement that have misconstrued what you just said, because you said some very interesting things now where you're like, yeah, it's a process, all these environmental things that happen, the way I feel when I do this and the way I feel when I do that. You're an adult though. You've over the years you've grown, you've had these experiences and all these things that influenced you not just biologically but also externally made you the person you are today. Now, yes, you were guided probably by your parents because your parents probably gave you dolls and all that stuff, or whatever it is that you liked at the time, like, oh, I want a dress or whatever, and your parents gave it to you. And sometimes parents do enforce a little bit, like, oh, well, you're a girl, so I'm going to buy you a pink dress, or I'm going to buy you this, or I'm going to buy that. Or maybe they'll say, well, you're a girl, you're not allowed to wear a boy's shirt, or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, the point I'm trying to make here is when you completely take away all those environmental experiences to the point where you just say, you know what, I'm going to let my kid just do what it does,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to grow up very confused.
Yeah, good luck with that. It's bullshit. No, first of all, that's crap. No one's going to do that because you would have a little monster on your hands. First of all, no parent is going to do that.
But isn't that essentially what they're saying in terms of, like, maybe not like completely rampant, obviously with some restrictions and some hopefully what is it, disobedience, but not disobedience. Sorry, what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, that when you teach them right and wrong. So with rules in place, if I can put it that way. But to the point when it comes to gender, just going like, I'm gonna let you be who you want to be, buddy. I think you're not even giving it a chance to recognize if it even likes certain things. You know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
like,
mean, look, I mean, because you can say, like, okay, what that would look like is I would let my kid choose the toys it wants to play with and the clothes it wants. But there are periods where, I mean, when they're babies, they can't make any choices for themselves. I mean, they can't even hold their own necks up, I mean, their own heads up. So I mean, like, you're gonna have to make choices for them. Um, and I take it that what they meant was this is all I can think is when they said they're not going to raise the baby gendered. They just mean they're not going to tell it what to do when it's at an age where it can choose things for itself.
Yes,
But
exactly.
for the
And
longest time before that, you're going to have to, because the baby can't do anything.
exactly. But now when it comes to that point where they have a discussion, or when the kids is now saying, "Oh, well, it's a boy and it wants to play with dolls," and they're like, "Okay, cool." I don't. Again, I think you're going to have a very confused child more than anything else, because in a way, even though the parent isn't directly influencing or directly involved with the decision, so to speak, of the child choosing what gender it wants to be, it's going to see, hold on a second, this other boy who's a friend is playing with trucks, but the
Yeah,
girl is playing with dolls. And
yeah,
that's where the confusion comes in, because now it thinks like, well, then I must be a girl. But not logically thinking about it,
mm,
not knowing what exactly entails, or it all entails to be a woman or a girl or whatever. It just makes those associations. So, okay, well then I'm a girl, and then
yeah,
because there's no parent around to say, well, actually, you know what, you shouldn't be playing, blah blah, or whatever the case may be. It will grow up with that misinformation, so to
yeah,
speak, with no correction, and therefore, again, be very confused. And I think that is a big problem. And if you're going to be upset with me for saying that, so be it. But I think that there's a reason why many doctors have tried to research this. There's a reason why, uh, for the longest amount of years, we used to tell our kids, like, if you're a boy, you have trucks and you blue, and like you wear blue stuff, and if it's a girl, it's pink and it's dolls and it's all that stuff. There's a reason for that. We
mm,
didn't just implement it for no reason. It's almost in a sense of very close to human nature. There's certain things that women need to learn and be exposed to help them become a functioning, well-rounded woman in society. And the same for the man. Like, for example, a man, like I got construction vehicles when I was a kid. There's like, and you dig in the sand and all that stuff.
yeah,
Because you're trying. My parents were trying to, like, not just obviously give me boy toys, but hey, if you want to one day become in the construction world, this is what you're going to be playing with and stuff like that. There's reasons for everything that you give to a kid, and even the way you teach them. And if you're not going to be um, not strict, but just let nature take its course in the way that it's supposed to be. You don't see lionesses in the wild tell with their cubs, just like, oh well, go out and hunt tonight. I'm not in the mood. I'm not going to teach you how to hunt. Why you don't need that. You don't need that. You're free now. Do what you want.
the biggest thing is the assumption that you can remove. So in terms of the nature nurture debate, that you can essentially completely remove the nurture part and let nature, whatever that means, can just sort of do its thing. It doesn't work like that. And one of the biggest conflicts I've seen in this position is that, so everything's a social construct. So it's the blank slate view of psychology. But so the idea being that if you're talking about gender, that's a complete social construct. It's not grounded in anything biological.
but
But
okay,
then,
and then but how?
so that's all nurture. That's all nurture. But
But
then you
but a
say, but
male a male genitalia is biology. That
I
is male.
I just want to draw this distinction because I want to show
Oh,
people how
sorry. Okay,
it
sorry.
is. So when it comes to gender, they want to say it's all nurture. Gender is a social construct. That's all.
Okay.
But then they look at sexual orientation. So whether you're gay or straight, and that's all nature. How is that possible? That you're looking at someone's sexual orientation and you're saying, you know what, you're just born like that. That's just, there's no nurture involved in that at all. But then when you're looking at gender, which is also an aspect of your sexuality,
Mm,
to very much determine how you sexually operate in the world,
mm.
that's all nurture. That's now completely so. There's no way that those two things are both true at the same time.
Yeah.
If anything, almost anything you can think of regarding humans is a combination of nature and nurture. How much of one or the other is not clear.
Yes.
But it is the any, and it's odd to me how quickly they take an extreme view on this issue, because they're trying to protect the group. Now I understand the need to protect marginalized groups, but you don't do it by sacrificing the truth. And because even if people can use that to weaponize it and to further discriminate, it doesn't help those groups if you can't actually bring people around to understanding what the hell is going on. And I think that what they try and do is they try and present this front of, so they want something that you can't question, something that, you know what, is just not up for debate. Because but it doesn't work like that. So which is why we've seen such a shift towards emotions, because or anything that's it's only up to me whether it's the case. Because if anything, if those things are only up to me, then no one can question it. No one can tell me I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But clearly, and that's what I was emphasizing last time, but clearly when it comes to your feelings, you can be wrong.
Yes.
You do that all the time. You think you're pissed off about one thing, and in fact, you're actually not pissed off. You're actually incredibly sad about another thing, and you're manifesting that as anger because you don't want to deal with how sad you are. So this is a big part of why they're actually harming their own cause, because they don't actually want to be realistic about what are the forces at work, how complicated this all is, and that if given how complicated it is, you cannot put children in a situation where they could harm themselves for the rest of their lives by making a stupid decision. So all these celebrities that want to go and be woke and raise their children that way, you know what? I mean, I feel sorry for those kids, because I think that you're harming them more than anything else.
Yeah. Okay, let's move away from the kids discussion now. The transracial part of it. Okay. So big fight now for everybody to be transgender, or not everybody, but like, you know, the people who want to be that can be that. Here we go. Sorry, guys. I had a little bit of an internet cut out there for a moment. I'm so sorry. Thank you if you're still with us. I see most of you are. Thank you so much. I'm really sorry that was on my side, but we're back. And I was taken a bit off. What was I saying? Oh yes, the we were talking about Michael Jackson. So Michael Jackson, right? That was it was brought up again in the stream. What about Michael Jackson when you were talking about the previous stream, right? How some people or some I don't even know how to explain it. I get so frustrated with this topic, um, and my mind starts going crazy. But let me get to the point. Let me get to the point. This
Yeah.
whole idea that because again what you said or what they said about, you know, in order to identify as black you would have had to have gone through some
Yeah.
racial
Discrimination.
discrimination is just what so this whole thing that now, okay, in order to, if you want to be, if I wanted to identify as black, for example, there's certain things, criteria that need to be met. Now, okay, and if those criteria are not accepted, then therefore I am not, or not, I can't be accepted to the public or to anyone else as black. What about now? Yeah, what about albinos? Because there are, I know that being an albino is a skin problem. I get that I don't know if it's a disability, but it's like a, I don't know what it falls under, but it's
Mutation.
yeah,
It's a genetic mutation, but
okay, a
it's
genetic mutation. Perfect. Now they albinos are white. That's, we all know that, but there are some with Africans that are albino. Now, yes, it's a genetic mutation, but they are still accepted in the black community, regardless.
yeah. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, it's a weird case, but I think the easy answer to that is to say, well, of course they're accepted, but that's because they meet all the conditions of what it means to be part of the race, you know, because they can, because remember in that list, if you accept that list, it's nowhere does it talk about physical features. It talks about private, your individual, so your self-awareness of your ancestry, public awareness of your ancestry, your culture, your self-identification. So I mean, albinos would meet all of those criteria. So it's not so in that case, even though yes, it's an odd case, I take it that people would say the reason why that's not an issue is because, and also it's not like they made a decision to be that way. They were born that way. And they were still born into their culture. So in every other respect, they would behave the same way as the people that form part of their racial group.
But doesn't someone
So
who is born, like if I could say that, I could be like, I was born and I've always felt I was black.
yeah, but you don't have the public recognition of ancestry that the albino person would have. So you were telling us a story, but how do we know it's true? In the albino case, I mean, and even if physical features are not on the list, I mean, albino people, yes, they have a white skin, but you can tell by their features that they're African. Like even if we're not being that stereotypical, you can still see that there's still characters, even if it was a white person, you could still their features that you can see make it the case that this is an outlier. So I think that that's probably what they would say about that case. Um,
So
I don't know if the I don't know if the Michael Jackson one is, but I don't. I mean, as far as I know, he never tried to claim that he was white. He just tried to look white. And then he was. What did you tell me? You told me he had some sort of skin.
yeah, apparently I don't know. I don't know the full story, but he's had some skin problem, and he apparently went under an operation to make himself all white, or dipped himself in bleach. Uh, well, here we go. Chico saying it's like the recent trend of people trying to say that Beethoven was black. I don't know. That's okay. Well, that's interesting. He brings up a good point, and I don't know if this is related to the topic because we have an
Mhm.
argument of some people saying that certain historical figures were actually black. For example, that whole thing of Jesus was black.
I'm sorry. When you said Beethoven, I thought it was talking about the dog, and I'm like, why? Why dog? And I was like, why are we talking about the ancestry of a dog?
No, no, Chico's a musician, so it's definitely Beethoven.
Beethoven.
but but yeah, I mean, like, would this fall under this whole transracial thing where people are now going and saying like certain historical figures were black?
Um, well, I don't know. I mean, like this, I doubt it. I mean, the whole idea is that yes, maybe people there could be times. I mean, we had that in South Africa where you had kids that were born from black parents or Indian parents or colored parents, and they looked white enough that they could be passed for white. And so those families would try and get those kids into situations where they could just legitimately say they're white and no one would question it.
Mm,
But there's a difference between that, like trying to pass off for a specific race,
mm,
and but though, I assume that those kids would, if they were actually asked, they would say they're not white.
mm,
They've been lying about it because they didn't want to be subjected to the laws of apartheid. But in the case we're considering, it's this issue of, in the same way that a transgender person would, saying, I have now made the decision that I don't belong to this category. I actually belong to this category, and I'm going to transition into it. And whether race is a similar sort of thing when you can do that. Um, and if it isn't, it's the thing of working the argument backwards. And then this is the thing, this is why transgender people don't like the argument, because if you accept the logic in favor of transgenderism
mm-hmm,
and you then forced to accept transracialism,
mm-hmm,
if you don't accept transracialism, you can work that logic back and then say, yeah, but then you can't accept transgenderism either. I mean, it's the
mm,
exact same logic. So you can't, in the one case, accept that it's a real thing,
mm,
and in the other case, say, no, it isn't. That
mm,
means then you can't say that transgenderism is real. But
yeah.
of course, they're not going to say that. So they have, in my opinion, their only way forward is to concede, yes, transracialism is a thing.
Mm.
but they don't want to be put in the corner like that.
Yep.
And this article. That's why they petitioned it,
Yeah.
because they didn't want to have to confront that conclusion.
Mm. Well, again, I think the only thing really that might be a monkey wrench in the whole thing is the whole debate about science, about biology.
Yeah.
Because the point of like, yeah, you can switch from a gender through science. Like, if I wanted to be a female, I could do operation and become female and pump myself with certain. Oh, my words today. It's on the tip of my tongue. Like estrogen, I can pump myself with estrogen and all that stuff. Whereas with race, you can't really apparently do that. Although I know Michael Jackson kind of did it. Okay, fine. Albinos doesn't really count. Um,
Actually, my argument is no. Actually, I actually, you know what? I actually think that in the case of transracialism, I think that's easier for me to accept than transgenderism. Precisely because of what you just said. To change your gender, to change that, you have to pump yourself full of a whole bunch of things. It's an incredibly difficult and long process. Whereas if you think of the race as a category,
hmm,
what makes it up, it's a lot simpler to shift into a race. Not to
okay, I
not to
see that
diminish
point.
what it means to be a race, to not to diminish the racial category, but if you think of what it would require,
Mm,
it's a much simpler process. I mean, you like Delasol did it. She did it so well that people couldn't even tell,
mm,
which again shows you that it's actually, in a lot of ways, that seems more intuitive to me than the idea that you can shift your gender. Again, this is the reason I say that is because your gender is connected to you biologically. I mean, it is this such a, even if I'm willing to concede the distinction between sex and gender, there's such a tight connection between them, between your sex, your gender, your sexuality. I mean, all of this is like, and it also is such a core aspect of your being. The idea for me that you could be wrong about that or can shift away from what you were born with, I find that much harder to wrap my head around than the idea that you're born into a race that you literally just don't identify with at all. So all the things that distinguish that race. You were telling me about that black girl on Dr. Phil
yes,
who says that she identifies as white.
yes.
There are a lot of I can more easily make sense of that. I mean, it's like people who say that they're born in one country, they go travel, they go visit another country with a completely different culture, and they slip into it like a glove. They just feel like, you know what, this is literally where they were meant to be their whole lives because they embrace every aspect of it. For me, that is so much easier to understand. So it's very weird to me that, and again, I know why they're finding the conclusion, but again, I think it's not compelling.
Mm,
And if you are willing to, if you're so committed to your position that you are actually willing to risk the well-being of children, I think you need to rethink your position. Um, and that's why I'm saying it's not transgender people; it's the trans movement I have a problem with.
mm,
Uh, and the day that they stop fucking with research and stop trying to get rid of it, to defund people and all of this crap, and they actually are willing to have a conversation and to understand that this has an enormous impact on society. And like I said last time, I don't care what you are, but the moment it imposes on my life and by extension the society I live in, so that I experience the consequences of that, it is my business. And so the moment they did that, the moment they interfered with research, the moment they insisted on transgender people participating in female sports, in female bathrooms, in female prisons, that's when I go, yeah, no, now it's not the same issue anymore. Yeah.
All right. Let me see here. Oh, wow. Yanni giving a 70 Rand super chat saying, Dr. Harley is a very good debater. I wish for her to debate
I swear if you say Bianca, I swear if the next word out of your mouth is Bianca.
Not exactly. Well, I think he means. Sorry, it's a very funny way of saying yeah. Wokahontas.
Actually good. Very good, actually. Well done. Very good.
But I think he does mean, yeah, like.
Okay. Look, I mean, I will say how I feel about that. Um, I've watched her debates with Ronaldo. I watched the one that she recently did, and as far as I'm concerned, I think Ronaldo handled the first one especially handled it well. I think there were a lot of points at which he could have made it clear that he had her in a corner. That she was refusing to answer certain points by deflecting and by backtracking to other points that were not really relevant, by getting stuck in pedantic points that had really no significant bearing on what was up for grabs. And Joe and I have talked about this, and the only reason why at the moment I'm not keen on doing it is because I don't believe that after the conversation she had with Ronaldo, that I'll do much better in terms of getting her to have an authentic conversation, as in not a conversation where she essentially tries to constantly control where it goes, and where she makes it very clear that she's not willing to answer certain questions and um, she gets stuck on points where it's really not what the conversation is about. And to be honest, it's not. I'm not trying to be arrogant or dismissive, but I just think it's a waste of my time. I would prefer to find someone on the left who I think is better able to have uh, an engaging conversation around it. And so I will put that effort in to try and find someone that I can debate where I don't agree with their view, but I think that they're actually willing to have a proper conversation about it.
Hmm. And can we announce our little plan so long? Or
Yeah.
all right.
Yep.
So for those of you, this is an exclusive. DNA is going to be somewhat of a resident guest on. Well, basically think of it as a radio show. Joe shows the radio show, and DNA has a show on that radio show. So she's going to be frequenting this channel a lot more. We're still finalizing all the details and how often and all the dates and stuff like that. But she will be discussing interesting topics with a guest of her choosing, and on the show. And yeah, it will be philosophical and interesting and thought-provoking discussions, much like what we're doing now. And yeah, so I don't know, maybe Bianca will want to come on your show, Dione. Who knows?
Maybe down the road, but we'll see.
Yeah. All right. Well, I look. I'll be honest. I also agree. So, unfortunately, it won't happen. Let's see here. Yeah, Chico's saying it. I feel like we should debate her on topics that aren't her gotcha topics. And debate with her is drier lint. Just to see if there's some semblance of logic in her thoughts.
Well, look, when I was talking about the feminism thing, and I was happy to have a conversation with her around feminism, and she, in her tweet, you can go look at the tweet, she said it's not her area of expertise. Well, I don't even know what that means. What does it mean to be to have it as an area of expertise? I mean, as a woman, I take it that she has specific feelings about the patriarchy and the feminist movement as part of the social. So it was very odd to me that she wasn't willing to debate me because on that particular topic because she felt that it wasn't her area. So I anticipate that she'll do the same thing where she'll do what she did with Ronaldo, in my opinion, where she agreed to have the conversation, but then when it came to it, she ducks and dives, and um, she, especially in the last conversation, she looks at Ronaldo the whole time like he's a crazy person.
Mm.
And for me, that's a sign of bad faith. It's a sign that you're basically the way you're going to treat me is as if I'm like a person who's been bitten by a monkey, and you're, kind of worried that I'm going to infect you.
Mm.
I need the person to, I need essentially when I debate someone, I need to feel like when they get there, they are willing to change some of their views.
Mm.
If they're not, then it's not a debate because essentially what you're saying is you're just there to be right,
Mm.
and I don't enjoy that. I need to feel like I'm debating someone who's willing to concede that they may not be right about everything.
But isn't
Um,
also a debate to? I mean, I've seen a few debates where both sides are still steadfast in their opinions, and they don't necessarily, uh, change their mind per se. But I think that at the end of the debate, they're still civil. They're still able to give both their opinions and debate. But it's more about the audience than it is about getting that information out for the audience of both sides, but both of them are still, this is why I believe in this and this is why I believe in this. Isn't that also considered a debate?
of course, yeah, no, that's I think that's more the standard notion of a debate. But I think what I mean is for me a worthwhile discussion with someone. Let's just say I'm a bit selfish. I don't just care about the audience's entertainment. I need to feel like I'm actually also getting something out of it.
That's fair enough.
And even though she talks a lot about bad faith, I don't believe that she debates in good faith. I think that she in the last interview, I think a lot of her intention was on not getting Ronaldo to catch her out.
Mm.
But in very weird ways, I feel like it wasn't. She wasn't really committed to having. And she talks about we need to talk about these things, but I suppose I just have a different understanding of what that means. And a big part of that for me is to not enter the conversation literally just focused on being right,
Yeah.
but honestly trying to understand where the person is coming from and seeing whether there is some middle ground. So essentially, there are some points that we can agree on, and then there's some points where we can still be maneuvered on. So it's not like it's written in stone. We can
Yeah.
still debate this point.
Yeah.
So I just I have a different understanding, and that's what I'm looking to get out of it.
Yeah.
So
Well, Chico saying not her area of expertise. Rolling face eyes. Research is her thing, though. Because she
yeah,
often says like, "Oh, I do research and I make notes and I do this," but yeah.
well, as a researcher, as someone who's done a PhD, I don't think we have the same understanding of research.
All right. So, okay, DNA, in our final moments here, in our final 10 minutes, is there a resolve to this? I mean, I know you kind of touched on it earlier, talking about it and not letting academics be defunded for doing this research. But is there maybe a different or another way of discussing this topic or, I don't know, protecting our children at least?
Well, to be honest, I was actually just astounded that clinical professionals, so people who are psychologists, I mean, they make certain commitments. They have a license that prohibits them from doing certain things. And I was astounded when I heard that children can be exposed to medical interference based on a claim that they suffer. I honestly thought that you couldn't do anything. I know that it requires your parents' consent,
Hmm.
but I still think that that's still going too far. A child cannot make decisions like that, even if the parent is willing to go along with it, until they're adults, until they are fully developed. This for me is not a controversial point, and I think it's incredibly strange that that is considered to be a controversial statement.
Hmm.
So unfortunately, I have to say that if I can't even talk to someone who's part of the transgender movement and we can't agree on that, there is no conversation to be had because that is not controversial. That is literally just saying, can you just wait until this person is fully developed, is a fully functional human being, before they're allowed to make any kinds of decisions about, in a very real way, altering their sexuality and who they are as a person.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, that doesn't bode well because there seem to be a lot of people in the trans movement who are not even willing to do that.
Well, DNA. This has been a very interesting conversation. Maybe we'll touch on it again in the future episodes that we do together. But I think for now, you
Mm,
brought to light some interesting points about the transgender movement. And once again, let's emphasize that we know that it's not. We have nothing against transgenders. I definitely don't. I know you don't. It's just again this idea that there's a in the academic world there's an attempt to suppress certain research, and as you said before many times, and I agree 100% with you, how can we expect to grow as a species or as human beings and have really factual and honest conversations about an issue if it's going to be one-sided all the time? There needs to be both sides of the argument heard, presented, and discussed. Otherwise, we're actually not becoming progressive. We're regressing.
absolutely.
So, DNA, thank you so much. Don't go anywhere, but as I sign off, thank you so much for joining me again. This has been very interesting. And before I go, I've been holding this back a bit because I thought I'd ask you at the end of the show. I know he's not watching anymore, but it's fine. I will send him a message. I'm sure you have his number anyway. But where is it? So he said, Germ Warfare was asking DNA, please come on my, please come back to my show.
I certainly will.
So yeah, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, please go check out Germ Warfare and DNA discussing feminism. I believe, wasn't?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very good conversation. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. Everyone here saying Eleutheria saying thank you both. Um, and Wotan saying STEM researcher here it is very different. And everyone saying yeah, Eleutheria once again saying yes, Dr. Harley, louder for those in the back. So agreeing with what you're saying. And yeah, thank you again. And for those of you that are watching, if you're new to my channel, please consider giving it a subscribe, give it a like. Thank you to all the people who became subscribers. Mark T, I think, subscribed earlier. Thank you so much for subscribing. Yanni, thank you for that super chat. And as well as Herman Roos, thank you for becoming a member. You guys are awesome. And to everyone else who tuned in, thank you so much. Remember, I will be back here tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow evening with Tamia Chele, who we're going to be talking about the Stellenbosch protests and the march, what's it, the Josie March? I don't know. I don't keep up with that stuff. But there was an interesting topic or debate that was happening on Twitter, which Tammy and I are going to talk about tomorrow evening. So please tune into that. And there's Yanni. See, Yanni is amazing. He went and he found the chat with you and Germ, and he put it in the link in the live chats. So
Thank you, guys.
so there you go, ladies and gentlemen. It's in the live chats now. Please go check out that conversation with Germ and Dr. Harley. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if I don't see you tomorrow night, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Remember, stay safe, be kind to one another, and I'll see you at the next one. Cheers. Good night. Hey guys, so if you enjoyed the show, please consider giving it a like and a share. Don't forget to subscribe as well if you're new to my channel. And if you really enjoyed the content, feel free to join and become a member. Don't forget about my fight against cancel culture. That's in the link in the description below. Support my fight against cancel culture. Go to that link and all the information is there. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching.